The bitter January wind howled across the snow-covered plains as Grace Williams clung desperately to the side of the stagecoach, her gloved fingers nearly frozen to the metal handrail. The year was 1878, and what had begun as a promising journey west had turned into a nightmare of blinding snowfall and treacherous mountain passes. When the driver finally brought the coach to a halt, shouting something about Grass Valley through the swirling snow, Grace peered out in confusion at the small cluster of buildings that was definitely not her intended destination of Sacramento, California. "This ain't right," she protested, her voice barely audible over the wind as the driver hastily unloaded her trunk. "I paid for passage to Sacramento." The weathered driver shook his head, snow collecting on his thick mustache. "Can't make it through the pass, madam. Storm's the worst I've seen in 15 years. We'll be stuck here in Nevada territory till spring thaw if we tried pushing on. Company policy, we let you off at the nearest safe stop." But Grace's objection was cut short as the driver climbed back onto his seat, gave a curt nod, and snapped the reins. The stagecoach lurched forward, leaving her standing alone in 8 inches of snow, her trunk at her feet, and the small mining town of Grass Valley, Nevada, stretching before her like some cruel joke. At 23, Grace had sold everything she owned in Boston to answer a teaching position in Sacramento. Now, as darkness began to fall and the temperature dropped further, she realized with growing panic that she had no plan, no contacts, and nowhere to stay in this unfamiliar frontier town. Summoning what courage remained, Grace gathered her skirts and began trudging toward what appeared to be the town's main street, her trunk dragging behind her through the snow. The wooden sidewalks were mostly empty, sensible people, having retreated indoors against the brutal weather. A few oil lamps cast weak yellow light through frosted windows, and smoke curled from stone chimneys. Grace's teeth chattered as she approached what looked to be a general store, hoping to at least find directions to lodging. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, bringing with her a swirl of snowflakes and frigid air. The store was warm, smelling of coffee, tobacco, and leather. An elderly shopkeeper looked up from behind the counter, surprise evident in his rheumy eyes. "Evening, miss. You look half frozen. Where'd you come from in this weather?" Grace explained her predicament, watching the old man's expression shift from surprise to sympathy. "Stage company left you stranded. Damn shame. Hotels full up with miners who can't get back to their claims. Boarding house, too." He scratched his white beard thoughtfully. Not many options for a lady alone in Grass Valley, especially not in this weather. The door opened again, and Grace turned to see a tall figure stomp snow from his boots before entering. The man unwound a scarf from his face, revealing features that made Grace momentarily forget the cold. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sharp blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face, and a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. His sheepskin coat was dusted with snow, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh environment. "Evening, Jasper," the newcomer said to the shopkeeper, his voice deep and pleasant. "Got that order of coffee and ammunition ready?" "Just wrapped it up, Adam. This young lady here's in quite a fix," Jasper gestured toward Grace. "Stage left her stranded, nowhere to stay till the next coach can get through." The man called Adam turned his full attention to Grace, those blue eyes assessing her thoughtfully. "That's so." Grace lifted her chin, determined not to appear as desperate as she felt. "I'm afraid I find myself in an unexpected situation, sir. The stagecoach was supposed to take me to Sacramento, but the driver claimed the pass was impassable." "It is," Adam confirmed. Pass won't clear till April at the earliest. I'm Adam Quinn." He extended a gloved hand. "Grace Williams," she replied, taking his hand briefly. His grip was firm and warm even through the leather. Adam glanced back at Jasper, then to Grace again. "I've got a cabin about 3 miles outside town. Simple but solid. There's a small second room I use for storage. You're welcome to it until spring if you've nowhere else to go." Grace blinked in shock at the offer. "Sir, I couldn't possibly. I'll be straight with you, Miss Williams," Adam interrupted. "A woman alone in Grass Valley has few options, none of them good. The miners outnumber decent folks 20-1. I'm offering you shelter, nothing more. You'll have your privacy and safety. Come spring, you can continue to Sacramento if you wish." Grace hesitated. Everything she knew told her not to trust a stranger, let alone follow one to an isolated cabin. Yet something in Adam Quinn's direct gaze suggested honesty. She was out of alternatives, and the howling wind outside reminded her just how desperate her situation had become. "If I may," Jasper interjected, "I've known Adam Quinn for 8 years. He's as good as his word. One of the few men around these parts I'd trust with my own daughter." Grace took a deep breath. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Quinn. I accept with gratitude." "Just Adam is fine," he replied, nodding once. "Let me finish my business here and we can head out before the storm worsens." Half an hour later, Grace found herself seated beside Adam in a sturdy wagon, her trunk secured in the back, wrapped in an extra blanket he'd provided. 2 strong horses pulled them through the thickening snow, their breath visible in the cold air. The temperature continued to drop as darkness enveloped them completely, the only light coming from Adam's lantern swinging from the wagon's frame. "It's not much further," he assured her after they'd been traveling in silence for some time. "Cabins in a sheltered valley. Storm won't hit as hard there." Grace nodded, too cold for conversation. She'd never experienced such biting cold in Boston, and fear began to creep into her thoughts about what life would be like in this harsh territory. The wagon turned off what passed for a road onto a narrower trail, and soon the silhouette of a cabin appeared through the trees. It was larger than Grace had expected, with a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A small barn stood nearby, and a corral fence was barely visible under the blanket of snow. "Home," Adam said simply, bringing the wagon to a halt. "Let's get you inside before you freeze solid." He helped her down, his hands strong and steady on her waist, then efficiently unloaded her trunk. Grace stood uncertainly as he led the horses and wagon toward the barn. "Doors unlocked," he called over his shoulder. "Go on in. I'll be there directly to start a fire." Grace pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into darkness. The interior was cold but, mercifully, free from the wind. She could make out vague shapes of furniture but little else. True to his word, Adam joined her minutes later, carrying a lantern that illuminated the space. The cabin was a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end. A wooden table with 4 chairs stood in the center, and a bed was positioned against the far wall. Various tools, books, and supplies lined shelves along the walls. A doorway on the right presumably led to the second room he'd mentioned. Adam moved efficiently, kneeling by the fireplace to build a fire from the stacked wood nearby. "It'll warm up soon," he promised, striking a match and touching it to the kindling. "That room there will be yours." He nodded toward the doorway. "Need to clear some things out, but there's a bed frame. We'll get a proper mattress set up tomorrow." Grace stood awkwardly, still bundled in her traveling clothes. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Adam. I promise I won't be a burden." The fire caught, sending orange light dancing across the cabin walls. Adam straightened, dusting his hands on his pants. "No burden. Been needing to organize that room anyway." He gestured toward a kettle hanging near the fireplace. "Water's frozen, but I'll get some melted for tea soon. Make yourself comfortable." As the fire grew stronger, Grace felt warmth gradually returning to her extremities. She removed her gloves and coat, hanging them on a peg by the door. Adam busied himself with various tasks, filling the kettle with snow, bringing in more firewood, setting out mugs for tea. "What brought you all the way from?" He paused, studying her. "Boston, I'd guess." "Yes, Boston," Grace confirmed, surprised at his perception. "I was traveling to Sacramento to take a teaching position at a new school there." Adam nodded. "Long way to come alone." "I have no family left in Boston," Grace explained, watching as he hung the kettle over the fire. "My parents passed within a year of each other, and I have no siblings." The teaching position seemed like a chance at a new beginning. "Teaching's needed out here," Adam commented. "Children growing up wild as rabbits might find work in Grass Valley while you wait for spring." The possibility hadn't occurred to Grace, but it made sense. "Are there many children in town?" "Enough. Miners with families, shopkeepers, ranchers from outlying areas. No formal schooling, though some of the mothers try their best." He checked the kettle, then returned to the fire. "What do you teach?" "Everything, really. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography." Grace found herself relaxing slightly as they talked. "I enjoy literature most, though. Shakespeare, Dickens, Austen." Adam smiled slightly. "Got a few books here. Nothing so fancy as Shakespeare, but you're welcome to them." Grace looked around the cabin more carefully. Indeed, a small bookshelf held perhaps 24 volumes, surprising in this frontier setting. "You're a reader, then." "Winter nights are long," he replied simply. "Man needs something to occupy his mind when snow makes the mountains impassable." The kettle began to steam, and Adam prepared 2 mugs of tea, handing one to Grace. The warmth of the mug was heavenly against her cold, stiffened fingers. "Tomorrow I'll show you around properly," Adam said, taking a seat at the table and gesturing for her to join him. "It's simple living, but we've got what we need. Smokehouse out back has enough meat to last the winter. Root cellar's full, chickens in the barn for eggs." "You've prepared well," Grace observed, sipping her tea gratefully. "Third winter here," Adam explained. "First one taught me preparation isn't optional. It's survival." Grace contemplated the man across from her. In Boston, she'd never have found herself alone in a cabin with a male stranger. Yet here, 3,000 miles from everything familiar, the normal rules of society seemed distant and impractical. Adam Quinn appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a solitary rancher offering shelter to someone in need, with no ulterior motives beyond basic human decency. "What brought you to Nevada territory?" she asked, curious about this self-sufficient man. Adam's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "War ended. Didn't much care for what was left back east." The brief answer told Grace he'd likely fought in the Civil War, which had ended 13 years earlier. His reticence suggested the experience wasn't one he cared to discuss, and she respected his privacy. "I'll help with chores while I'm here," she offered. "Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing." Adam nodded. "Appreciate that. We'll figure out a rhythm." He finished his tea and stood. "Should get that room ready for you. Been using it for storage, but it'll make a decent bedroom once cleared." Grace followed him to the doorway and peered into the smaller room. It was indeed being used for storage. Crates of supplies, tools, and various equipment filled much of the space, though a simple bed frame stood against one wall. "I have a spare mattress in the barn loft," Adam explained. "Too dark and cold to fetch it tonight. You can take my bed and I'll use a bedroll by the fire." "I couldn't possibly displace you," Grace protested. "Slept worse places," he replied matter-of-factly. "Just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll get your room proper." Too exhausted to argue, Grace accepted the arrangement. Adam provided her with privacy to change into her nightclothes, then settled himself by the fire with a bedroll and extra blankets while she took the bed. Despite her extraordinary circumstances and the strangeness of sleeping in a stranger's cabin, Grace fell into an exhausted sleep almost immediately. The sound of the wind outside and the crackling fire the last things she heard. Grace woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling above her, the weight of extra blankets, and the crackling fire in the stone hearth slowly brought yesterday's events back into focus. She was in a cabin in Nevada territory, stranded until spring with a man she'd met just yesterday. She sat up, gathering the blankets around her against the morning chill. Adam stood at the fireplace, tending to a cast iron pan where bacon sizzled. He'd already been outside, judging by the fresh snow melting from his boots near the door. "Morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Breakfast shortly." "Thank you," Grace replied, conscious of her disheveled appearance. "If you'll excuse me for a moment." Adam nodded, turning back to his cooking as Grace slipped from the bed, grabbed her carpetbag, and retreated behind a folding screen in the corner that she hadn't noticed the night before. He must have set it up while she slept, an unexpectedly thoughtful gesture that provided a modicum of privacy in the one-room cabin. She dressed quickly in a simple blue wool dress, ran a brush through her chestnut hair, and pinned it into a modest bun before emerging. Adam had set 2 plates on the table, each with bacon, bread, and a portion of beans. It was simple fare but smelled delicious to Grace's empty stomach. "I've fed the animals and brought in fresh water," Adam explained as they sat to eat. "Storms let up some, but there's at least 3 feet of snow on the ground. We're not going anywhere today." Grace nodded, understanding the implications. She was well and truly stranded here, with this quiet, capable stranger her only human contact for the foreseeable future. "I cleared some space in that room," Adam continued. "After breakfast, I'll get the mattress from the barn. By tonight, you'll have proper quarters." "I appreciate your kindness," Grace said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't offered me shelter." Adam shrugged slightly. Not much kindness in these mountains. Figured the world could use a bit more. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Grace found herself studying Adam when he wasn't looking. In the daylight, she could better observe the details of his appearance. His dark hair had a slight wave to it, and though his beard was untrimmed, it somehow suited his rugged features. His hands were strong and weathered, those of a man accustomed to hard physical labor, yet there was a certain gentleness in how he handled his coffee cup and utensils. "How long have you lived in Grass Valley?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Settled here 3 years ago," Adam replied. "Spent a year before that traveling the territory looking for the right place. And this is it, the right place." Adam glanced toward the window where sunlight now streamed through, reflecting brilliantly off the snow-covered landscape. Far enough from trouble, good water, decent grazing for cattle in summer. Folks in town mind their business. He looked back at her. "It suits me." Grace had the distinct impression there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone who came west did so for their own reasons, often leaving complicated pasts behind. She certainly had her own reasons for accepting the Sacramento position beyond just employment. After breakfast, Adam bundled up to retrieve the mattress from the barn, insisting Grace stay by the fire where it was warm. When he returned, dragging the surprisingly good quality mattress through the door, his face and beard were dusted with snow. "It'll need airing," he admitted, maneuvering the bulky item through the doorway to the small room. "Been stored a while, but it's clean and without holes." Together they set up the bedroom, Adam moving crates and supplies to make space, while Grace arranged the mattress on the bed frame and made it up with clean linens he provided. By midday, the room had been transformed into a modest but comfortable sleeping chamber, with a small table beside the bed that held a lantern and hooks on the wall for her clothing. "It's perfect," Grace assured him, genuinely pleased with their work. "Far better than I could have hoped for yesterday when that stagecoach left me standing in the snow." Adam's normally serious expression softened slightly. "Glad you think so. Not exactly what you're used to in Boston, I'd imagine." "Boston feels very far away now," Grace admitted. "Almost like a different lifetime." They spent the afternoon with Adam showing Grace the essentials of cabin life, how to maintain the fire, where supplies were kept, the operation of the pump he'd installed inside to draw water from his well without going outside in severe weather. Grace absorbed everything carefully, determined to pull her weight during her unexpected stay. As dusk approached, Adam donned his coat again. "Need to check the animals once more before dark. Might be a while." Grace nodded, already comfortable enough to begin preparing their evening meal without direction. She found potatoes and dried herbs in the pantry, along with salt pork and onions. By the time Adam returned, stomping snow from his boots at the threshold, she had a hearty stew simmering over the fire. "Smells good," he commented, hanging his coat by the door. "Been a while since someone else did the cooking." "You live here alone?" Grace asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he lived alone. There was only the one bedroom until he'd converted the storage room. "Just me," Adam confirmed, warming his hands by the fire. "Had a partner when I first came out, man named Harris. We were going to run cattle together, but he took ill that first winter. Pneumonia. Doctor couldn't get through the snow." The simple explanation carried the weight of tragedy, and Grace's heart went out to this man who'd faced such isolation and loss. "I'm sorry." Adam nodded acknowledgement of her sympathy, but offered nothing more on the subject. Instead, he moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle and 2 small glasses. "Not much for drinking normally, but cold nights sometimes call for it. Care to join me?" Grace hesitated only briefly before nodding. The normal social restrictions that would have prevented a respectable woman from drinking with a man seemed absurd in their current circumstances. Adam poured a finger of amber liquid into each glass and handed one to Grace. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down, warming her from within. They sat by the fire, the stew bubbling nearby, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Grace felt a curious sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't where she'd intended to be, certainly not how she'd planned to spend her winter. But there was something undeniably comforting about the snug cabin with its crackling fire and the quiet, steady presence of Adam Quinn. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds, we could ride into town," Adam suggested. "Get you proper introduced to folks, maybe ask about teaching possibilities." "I'd like that," Grace replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The prospect of establishing herself in this community, even temporarily, appealed to her independent nature. "Though I'm not much of a rider." Adam's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Got a gentle mare that might suit you. We'll take it slow." They fell into conversation more easily than Grace would have expected, given Adam's initially taciturn nature. He told her about the cattle. He kept a small herd that he grazed in the high meadows during summer and brought down to sheltered pastures for winter. She shared stories of her teaching experiences in Boston, the challenges and rewards of working with children from various backgrounds. As they ate the stew Grace had prepared, Adam remarked, "You cook better than I do." "That's certain." Grace smiled at the compliment. "My mother insisted I learn household skills even while pursuing my education. She said a woman should be prepared for any circumstance. Wise woman, Adam commented. Out here, everyone needs to know a bit of everything. Specialization is a luxury of cities. After dinner, Adam surprised Grace by producing a chessboard from a shelf. You play, helps pass the evening hours. Grace nodded, pleased. My father taught me, though I warn you I'm considered quite good. Adam's eyes held a hint of challenge as he set up the pieces. We'll see about that, Miss Williams. The evening passed pleasantly with their chess match. Grace discovered Adam to be a thoughtful, strategic player, not surprising given what she'd observed of his character. She won the first game, he the second, and they were deep into a tightly contested third when Grace found herself stifling yawns. We should turn in, Adam suggested, noting her fatigue. Morning comes early here. Grace nodded gratefully and retired to her new room, which now felt remarkably like her own space despite its improvised nature. As she drifted to sleep, she found herself thinking that if she had to be stranded in a strange town, she'd been extraordinarily fortunate in her benefactor. Adam Quinn might be a man of few words and mysterious past, but his actions spoke volumes about his character. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. After breakfast, Adam brought around 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding for himself and a gentle-looking dappled mare for Grace. This is Daisy, he said, helping Grace mount. Steadiest horse I've ever owned. She'll take good care of you. The ride into Grass Valley took nearly an hour at their leisurely pace. Grace, wearing her warmest clothes and wrapped in an extra woolen scarf Adam had provided, marveled at the pristine winter landscape. Snow-covered pines surrounded them, and occasionally they'd spot deer watching cautiously from a distance or rabbits darting across the trail. It's beautiful, Grace admitted, her breath visible in the cold air. Different from anything I've known before. Country has its own kind of beauty, Adam agreed. Takes some getting used to, but gets in your blood after a while. As they approached town, Grace saw Grass Valley through fresh eyes. What had seemed like a bleak, unwelcoming cluster of buildings during the blizzard now revealed itself as a surprisingly vibrant community. The main street boasted a general store, saloon, blacksmith, assay office, and various other businesses. People moved about their day, shoveling snow from walkways or hauling goods between buildings. Adam led her to a hitching post outside the general store and helped her dismount. Her legs felt stiff from the unaccustomed activity, and she was grateful for his steadying hand. Jasper will want to make sure you settled in all right, Adam explained as they entered the store. And his wife Mary makes the best coffee in the territory. The bell above the door announced their arrival, and the elderly shopkeeper from the previous day looked up with a smile. Well now, look who's here. Miss Williams, glad to see you survived your first night in Quinn's bachelor accommodations. Mr. Quinn has been extremely hospitable, Grace assured him, stamping snow from her boots. Adam, hospitable. That's a first, came a female voice, and Grace turned to see a plump, gray-haired woman emerging from a back room. I'm Mary, Jasper's better half. You must be the stranded teacher he told me about. Grace Williams, she introduced herself, immediately warming to Mary's friendly manner. Yes, I'm afraid I found myself quite unexpectedly in your town. Well, you come on back and have some coffee while the men talk business, Mary insisted, taking Grace by the arm. I want to hear all about your journey. Grace followed Mary to a small sitting area behind the store, where a pot of coffee bubbled on a wood stove. As they chatted, Grace explained her circumstances more fully, and Mary listened with genuine interest and sympathy. Stranded till spring, my goodness, Mary said, shaking her head. Though I must say, Landing at Adam Quinn's cabin might be the best stroke of luck you could have had. Not many men around here I'd trust a young woman with, but Adam's different. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's solid as they come." "He's been very kind," Grace acknowledged. "I just hope I'm not imposing too greatly on his solitude." Mary waved away her concern. "Do that man some good to have company. Been alone too long since he lost his partner. Not natural for folks to live so isolated." Their conversation turned to the town itself, with Mary explaining the history of Grass Valley. It had begun as a silver mining settlement in the 1860s, but unlike many boom towns, it had managed to establish itself as a permanent community when local ranchers began settling the surrounding valleys. "We've got about 200 souls all told," Mary explained. "More in summer when the mines are fully operational and cattle drives come through." "Mr. Quinn mentioned there might be teaching opportunities here," Grace ventured. "Are there many children in town?" Mary's eyes brightened. "Oh my, yes. At least 30 school-age children and not a proper teacher among us. Some of us mothers take turns teaching basics, but none of us has your training. The town council's been talking about hiring a teacher come spring, but they haven't found the right person." "I would be very interested in discussing possibilities," Grace said, her professional instincts awakening. "Even if it's just temporary until I can continue to Sacramento." "I'll tell you what," Mary said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "My husband's on the town council. I'll have him arrange a meeting for tomorrow. The children deserve proper schooling, and you need something to occupy your time while you're here. Seems like Providence to me." Grace smiled gratefully. "I would appreciate that very much." When they rejoined the men, Adam was concluding his business with Jasper, purchasing supplies that he methodically added to his saddlebags. Jasper greeted Grace warmly. "Mary been filling your ear with town gossip?" he asked with a wink at his wife. "I've been telling her about the children needing a teacher," Mary corrected him. "And you'll be speaking to Mayor Dawson about calling a council meeting tomorrow, won't you, dear?" Jasper recognized his wife's tone and nodded agreeably. "Course I will. Town's been needing a school teacher for years." Adam glanced at Grace. "Thinking of staying in Grass Valley a while then?" "Just until the pass clears," Grace clarified. "But I'd like to be useful while I'm here, and teaching is what I know." Something in Adam's expression suggested he wasn't entirely pleased with this development, though Grace couldn't imagine why. Perhaps he worried about the logistics of her traveling to town daily from his remote cabin. Their next stop was the town's small dressmaker's shop, where Adam insisted Grace order a few items better suited to the harsh Nevada winter than her Boston clothing. "Consider it an advance on your teaching wages," he said when she protested the expense. "Can't have Grass Valley's new schoolmarm freezing because she's too proud to accept help." The dressmaker, a Frenchwoman named Madame Beaufort, clucked sympathetically at Grace's city clothes. "These won't do at all, chérie. You need wool, heavy cotton, proper boots." She took measurements efficiently, promising to have at least one suitable outfit ready by the following day. As they continued down the main street, Adam introducing Grace to various townspeople they encountered, she was touched by the community's warm welcome. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased to meet her, and word of her teaching credentials spread quickly, with several parents expressing enthusiasm about their children receiving proper instruction. Their final stop was a small building with a sign identifying it as the town's newspaper office. Inside, a bespectacled man in his 40s looked up from an ancient printing press. "Howard," Adam greeted him. "Meet Grace Williams. She's staying at my place till spring. Stagecoach left her stranded." "Left you at the wrong town, did they?" Howard said sympathetically, shaking Grace's hand. "Happens more often than the stage company likes to admit," Howard Banks, editor and proprietor of the Grass Valley Chronicle, at your service. Miss Williams is a teacher from Boston, Adam explained. Might be taking on the town's children while she's here. Howard's eyes lit up. Now that's news worth printing. Mind if I interview you for next week's edition, Miss Williams? Boston educator brings learning to frontier children has a nice ring to it. Grace couldn't help but laugh at his enthusiasm. I haven't even met with the town council yet, Mr. Banks. Perhaps we should wait until something is official. Fair enough, Howard agreed. But I get the exclusive when it happens. By the time they left town in the early afternoon, Grace felt a curious sense of belonging already taking root. The residents of Grass Valley had welcomed her without question, seeing not a stranded traveler but a valuable addition to their community. As they rode back toward Adam's cabin, she shared this observation. Small towns are like that, Adam replied. Everyone has their place, their purpose. A teacher is something Grass Valley's needed for a long while. You don't sound entirely pleased about it, Grace noted, studying his profile as they rode side by side. Adam was quiet for a moment, seemingly considering his response, just wondering how it changes things. You riding into town daily, becoming part of the community, different from what I offered simple shelter till spring. Are you concerned about the arrangement? Grace asked directly. I could perhaps find lodging in town if— No, Adam interrupted, more forcefully than she expected. That's not what I meant. The cabin's yours as long as you need it. He hesitated. Just been a while since my life had any complications. Grace wasn't sure how to interpret this, but she sensed it wasn't a rejection. I promise to respect your privacy and routines. The teaching would just give me purpose while I'm here. Adam nodded, seemingly satisfied with this. We'll make it work. Town's been needing someone to properly educate those children. When they reached the cabin, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. They cared for the horses together, Grace insisting on learning the proper procedures for unsaddling and grooming Daisy. Inside the cabin, they settled into what was becoming a comfortable routine, with Adam building up the fire while Grace prepared a simple meal. Tomorrow we can ride in for your meeting with the council, Adam said as they ate. I've got business with the blacksmith anyway. Thank you, Grace replied, watching him across the table. In just 2 days, she'd grown surprisingly comfortable in this man's presence. There was something steadying about Adam Quinn, a sense of reliability that made her feel secure despite the uncertainty of her situation. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Adam reading a book while Grace worked on mending a tear in one of her dresses, she found herself stealing glances at his profile. In the firelight, his features were softer, less weathered. What had brought this thoughtful, capable man to this isolated existence? What ghosts was he running from or perhaps toward? As if sensing her thoughts, Adam looked up from his book. Something on your mind? Grace hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was just wondering about your story. What brought you west after the war? Adam's expression remained neutral, but he set his book aside, a sign he was willing to engage with her question. Same as many men, I suppose. War changes a person. Home didn't feel like home anymore. You fought for the Union, Grace ventured. Adam nodded. Pennsylvania infantry, 4 years of my life. He stared into the fire. Came back to find my father dead, family farm mortgaged to keep things going. Mother remarried to a man I couldn't abide. I'm sorry, Grace said softly. Long time ago now, Adam replied, though his eyes suggested the memories remained fresh. Worked the railroads for a while, then cattle drives up from Texas, saved enough to stake my own claim eventually. And you chose Nevada territory. Farthest I could get from battlefields and memories, Adam admitted. Wanted empty spaces, room to breathe. Found this valley, figured it was as good a place as any to stop running. The simple confession revealed more than perhaps Adam intended, and Grace felt privileged to glimpse this part of him. You ever regret it? Coming so far from everything you knew? Adam considered this, his gaze still fixed on the dancing flames. Some days. Winter's the hardest, too much time for thinking. He finally looked at her. What about you? Teaching position doesn't seem reason enough to leave everything behind. Grace wasn't surprised by his perception. My parents' deaths left me in difficult circumstances. The family home had to be sold to settle debts. My position at the girls' school in Boston became complicated. Adam raised an eyebrow questioningly but didn't press. The headmaster's son developed an attachment to me, Grace explained reluctantly. When I didn't return his sentiments, the situation became uncomfortable. The Sacramento position arrived at precisely the right moment. Running away too, then, Adam observed without judgment. Perhaps, Grace acknowledged, though I prefer to think of it as running toward something new. Adam's mouth curved in a slight smile. Better way of looking at it. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics after that, but something had shifted between them. A mutual recognition. Perhaps two people who understood what it meant to leave the past behind and seek renewal in unfamiliar territory. As Grace retired to her room that night, she realized with some surprise that she was looking forward to tomorrow, to the council meeting, to the prospect of teaching again. For the first time since losing her parents, she felt a sense of purpose returning. That this feeling had found her in a snowbound cabin in Nevada territory, of all places, seemed like the sort of divine providence her mother would have attributed to God's mysterious ways. The town council, meeting the next day, exceeded Grace's expectations. Mayor Dawson and the 4 other council members, including Jasper, listened attentively to her credentials and teaching philosophy, clearly impressed by her formal education and experience. By the meeting's conclusion, Grace had been officially appointed as Grass Valley schoolteacher until the spring thaw, with a modest salary and the use of the town's meeting hall as a classroom. We've been setting aside funds for education for 2 years now, Mayor Dawson explained, a portly man with an impressive mustache that quivered when he spoke. Just never found the right teacher willing to come to a place like Grass Valley. The children can start next Monday, added Councilman Parker, a rancher with 3 school-age children of his own. Give you time to prepare and get word to the outlying homesteads. Adam had waited patiently outside during the meeting, attending to his business with the blacksmith. When Grace emerged with the good news, she was surprised to see genuine pleasure in his normally guarded expression. "Congratulations, schoolmarm," he said, tipping his hat with uncharacteristic playfulness. "Told you they'd snap you up quick." They celebrated with lunch at the town's small cafe, where the owner, Mrs. Hollies, insisted on treating them to her special venison stew when she heard about Grace's appointment. Word traveled quickly in the small community, and throughout the meal, various townspeople stopped by their table to welcome Grace and express enthusiasm about their children's education. "I'll need supplies," Grace remarked as they finished eating. "Books, slates, chalk. I don't imagine the town has much in the way of educational materials." "Jasper keeps some basics at the store," Adam replied. "And Howard at the newspaper might have paper to spare. For the rest, we can send orders to Carson City. Winter mail still gets through, even if passengers don't." The use of "we" didn't escape Grace's notice, nor the fact that Adam seemed to be fully embracing her temporary position in the community. His initial reservations appeared to have vanished, replaced by practical support that touched her deeply. They spent the afternoon gathering what supplies they could find in town: a dozen slates from Jasper's store, paper and pencils from Howard, chalk from the assay office, and a surprising number of books donated by various townspeople. By the time they were ready to ride back to the cabin, Daisy's saddlebags were filled with the beginnings of a proper school. "I can't thank you enough for your help today," Grace told Adam as they reached the cabin just before sunset. "Community needs this," Adam replied simply, helping her down from Daisy. "Those kids deserve better than growing up unable to read or cipher properly." Inside, as they warmed themselves by the fire, Grace began sorting through the donated materials, making lists of what she'd need to prepare before Monday. Adam watched her with quiet amusement. "Haven't seen anyone so excited about work in a long while," he commented, preparing coffee for them both. Grace looked up from her planning, suddenly self-conscious. "I suppose I am excited. Teaching gives me purpose, a way to contribute." "It's good," Adam assured her. "This town needs someone with your passion." That evening, as they shared a simple dinner, Grace found herself watching Adam with new eyes. The man who had initially seemed so taciturn, so determined to maintain his solitary existence, had spent his entire day helping her establish herself in the community. It was a kindness beyond the shelter he'd offered, suggesting an investment in her success that went beyond mere charity. "Why did you really offer me your cabin that first night?" Grace asked suddenly, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. Adam looked up, surprise momentarily visible in his blue eyes before his expression returned to its usual reserve. "Told you." Woman alone in Grass Valley didn't have good options. Many men would have pointed me toward the saloon or boarding house and considered their duty done, Grace persisted. "You brought a complete stranger into your home, disrupted your solitude, rearranged your living space. Why?" Adam set down his fork, giving her question proper consideration. "Might sound foolish," he finally said, "but something about the way you stood there in Jasper's store, back straight, chin up, despite being obviously lost and cold, reminded me of someone." "Who?" Grace asked softly. "My sister," Adam admitted, his voice taking on a quality Grace hadn't heard before. "She had that same determination, never let circumstances beat her down." "I didn't know you had a sister." "Don't anymore," Adam said simply. "Influenza, winter of '67, year after I came back from the war." The simple statement carried immense weight, and Grace understood suddenly that she had stumbled upon one of the ghosts that had driven this man west. "I'm sorry." Adam nodded acknowledgement. "Rebecca was 20 when she passed, smart as a whip, wanted to be a teacher actually." His mouth curved in a slight, sad smile. "Maybe that's the real reason I offered you shelter. Seemed like something she would have wanted me to do." The admission was clearly difficult for him, and Grace felt honored by his trust. "Thank you for telling me about her. She sounds like someone I would have liked to know." "You would have gotten along fine," Adam agreed, then deliberately lightened his tone. "Now tell me about these lessons you're planning. What are you going to teach these wild Nevada children first?" Grace allowed him to change the subject, recognizing the emotional cost of his revelation. As they discussed her curriculum plans, she found herself increasingly aware of Adam as not just her benefactor, but as a man with depths, sorrows, and kindnesses that had shaped him. The mystery of Adam Quinn was gradually revealing itself, and each new discovery only increased her respect and, she had to admit, her growing fondness for him. The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. Grace transformed a corner of the cabin into a makeshift planning area, organizing lessons and preparing materials for her first day of teaching. Adam rode into town on Saturday to help clean and arrange the meeting hall, returning with news that 17 children had already been enrolled by eager parents. On Sunday evening, as Grace reviewed her plans one final time, anxiety and excitement battling within her, Adam approached with something hidden behind his back. "Got something for you," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "For tomorrow." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box. Grace opened it to find a beautiful brass bell, its surface polished to a warm glow. "Every teacher needs a bell," Adam explained, watching her face carefully. "Found it at Jasper's store. Been sitting in his back room for years," he said. Grace was touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she said, lifting it from the box and giving it an experimental ring. The clear, bright tone filled the cabin. "Thank you, Adam." "Just wanted you to have something proper to start your school," he replied, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Those kids won't know what hit them when Miss Williams from Boston starts ringing that bell." The moment held an unexpected intimacy, a shared anticipation of tomorrow's beginning. Grace found herself studying Adam's face in the lamplight, noting the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was pleased, how his normally stern mouth softened when he smiled. In just a few days, this man had gone from stranger to what? Friend seemed insufficient, yet anything more would be presumptuous. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. Adam insisted on accompanying Grace to town, though she assured him she could manage the ride alone. "First day's important," he said simply. "Should have someone there to see you start." They arrived at the meeting hall to find it already bustling with activity. Children of various ages, from perhaps 5 to 15, waited outside with parents who greeted Grace enthusiastically. Inside, the hall had been transformed with rows of benches facing a larger table that would serve as her desk. A blackboard had been mounted on the wall, a surprise addition since her last visit. "Mayor had it shipped in from Carson City last year," explained Mrs. Parker, who had arrived early to help. "Been sitting in storage waiting for a proper teacher." As 9 o'clock approached, Grace found herself growing nervous. These children, with their varied backgrounds and unknown capabilities, would be looking to her for guidance and knowledge. What if she failed them? What if her Eastern education proved unsuitable for these frontier children? As if sensing her doubts, Adam appeared at her side. "They're going to adore you," he said quietly. "Just be the teacher you know how to be." Strengthened by his confidence, Grace stepped outside, raised her new bell and rang it clearly. The chattering children fell silent, looking to her expectantly. "Good morning," she said, smiling warmly. "I'm Miss Williams and I'll be your teacher. Please line up by age, youngest to oldest, and we'll go inside to begin our first day of school." The children obeyed with varying degrees of promptness and confusion. Adam watched from a distance, his expression one of quiet pride that bolstered Grace's confidence. As she prepared to lead her new students inside, he tipped his hat to her and mouthed, "Good luck," before turning toward his waiting horse. Grace's first day as Grass Valley's teacher unfolded better than she could have hoped. The children, though varied in their abilities and previous exposure to education, were uniformly eager to learn. The younger ones watched her with wide-eyed fascination as she taught them the alphabet, while the older students tackled arithmetic and geography with determination. By the time she rang the bell to end the school day at 3 o'clock, Grace was exhausted but exhilarated. Several parents had gathered to collect their younger children, offering warm words of gratitude that confirmed she'd made a positive first impression. To her surprise, Adam was among those waiting outside. He stood a little apart from the parents, leaning against a hitching post with Daisy and his own horse already saddled nearby. "Thought you might appreciate the company riding home," he explained as the last students departed. "How'd it go?" "Wonderfully," Grace replied with genuine enthusiasm as they mounted their horses. "The children are bright and eager. Some have had minimal instruction from parents, others almost none, but all of them want to learn." As they rode, Grace shared stories from her first day, the 5-year-old twins who could already recite their letters, the 12-year-old boy who never held a pencil before but showed natural aptitude for drawing, the teenagers who initially affected boredom but became engaged during a history lesson about the Mexican-American War. Adam listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her work and the children's progress. Grace found herself talking more than she had in months, her natural reticence overcome by professional enthusiasm and the pleasure of having an interested audience. "You found your place already," Adam observed as the cabin came into view. "One day, and you're already Grass Valley's schoolmarm through and through." Grace smiled at the observation. "It feels right," she admitted, "even if it's only temporary." A shadow crossed Adam's face at the reminder of the temporary nature of her position. So brief, Grace wasn't entirely sure she'd seen it. Before she could consider its meaning, he'd moved ahead to open the corral gate for their horses. The routine they established over the next weeks developed with surprising naturalness. Each morning, they would ride together to town, Adam attending to his business while Grace taught. In the afternoons, they would return to the cabin, where evenings were spent in companionable activities, Grace preparing lessons while Adam read or worked on small projects, both sharing the cooking and household chores without discussion or discord. Weekends took on their own rhythm. Saturdays often found them in town longer, with Grace using the time to organize the schoolroom and Adam socializing reluctantly at the general store, where men gathered to exchange news and play checkers. Sundays were quieter, with Adam teaching Grace more about the practicalities of ranch life, how to chop wood efficiently, care for the chickens, preserve meat in the smokehouse. January gave way to February, and still the mountain passes remained firmly closed by snow and ice. The stagecoach service remained suspended, as Adam had predicted, with only male riders occasionally making the treacherous journey between larger settlements. Grace found herself thinking less and less about Sacramento. Her teaching position there seemed increasingly abstract, while her life in Grass Valley, her students, the friendly townspeople, the cabin she shared with Adam had taken on a concrete reality that grew more meaningful with each passing day. Adam, too, seemed to have adapted to their shared living arrangement with surprising ease. The man who had initially presented himself as a confirmed loner now engaged in conversations that stretched into the night, sharing stories of his travels and listening attentively to Grace's recollections of Boston. He smiled more readily, laughed occasionally, a rich, warm sound that Grace found herself trying to elicit whenever possible. On a particularly cold evening in mid-February, they sat before the fire after dinner, a chessboard between them. Their games had become increasingly competitive as Grace learned Adam's strategies and he adapted to counter hers. Tonight, concentration furrowed his brow as he contemplated his next move. "I've been thinking," Grace said, watching him study the board, "about Sacramento." Adam's hand paused over a bishop. "What about it?" "I'm not sure I want to continue there when spring comes," Grace admitted. The thought had been forming in her mind for weeks, but speaking it aloud made it suddenly real. Adam looked up, genuine surprise in his eyes. "Because of the school here?" "Partly," Grace acknowledged. "The children are making remarkable progress. It seems wrong to abandon them mid-term." "Town would hire you permanent if you wanted," Adam said carefully, his expression guarded. Council's been more than pleased with your work." Grace nodded, having already heard as much from Mayor Dawson. "It's not just the school, though." She hesitated, uncertain how to express the complex evolution of her feelings. "I've come to care for this place, the people, the community." Adam's eyes held hers steadily. "Grass Valley grows on a person," he said, his tone neutral despite the intensity of his gaze. "Yes, it does," Grace agreed, her heart beating faster for reasons she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I thought perhaps if the town's offer is genuine, I might stay, at least through the summer." "What about lodging?" Adam asked. "If you're staying beyond spring, you'll want your own place in town eventually." The question held implications that made Grace's breath catch. Was he suggesting she should move out of the cabin, or was he offering a more permanent arrangement? Either possibility carried emotional weight she wasn't prepared to address directly. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she replied honestly. "For now, I'm just considering the teaching position." Adam nodded, returning his attention to the chessboard. "You'd be good for this town," he said after moving his bishop. "Children need stability, knowing their teacher isn't just passing through." "And what about you?" Grace asked, the question emerging with more vulnerability than she intended. "Would my staying be good for your solitude?" Adam looked up again, something unreadable in his expression. "Cabin's been warmer this winter," he said simply, "not just from the fire." The statement, for all its simplicity, carried profound meaning. Grace felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crackling flames beside them. Before she could respond, however, a sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin windows, breaking the moment. "Storm's picking up again," Adam observed, rising to add another log to the fire. "Might be a rough ride to town tomorrow if this keeps up." The subject of Grace's future plans was set aside, though not forgotten. As she retired to her room later that night, Grace found herself contemplating not just her professional prospects in Grass Valley, but the increasingly complicated nature of her feelings for Adam Quinn. What had begun as gratitude for his kindness had evolved into respect, friendship, and now something deeper that she hesitated to name, even to herself. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind filled with possibilities and uncertainties. The howling wind outside seemed to echo the turbulence of her thoughts, as winter maintained its grip on the mountains and, perhaps, on their shared destiny. The February storm proved more severe than anticipated, dropping another 2 feet of snow overnight and making the trail to town impassable. For the first time since starting her teaching position, Grace was unable to reach the schoolhouse. "No riding in this," Adam declared after checking the conditions at dawn. "Trails completely drifted over in places. Too dangerous." Grace accepted his judgment without argument, having seen enough of Nevada winter to understand the very real dangers. "The children will be disappointed," she said, peering through the frosted window at the blinding whiteness outside. "We were starting a new geography unit today." "They'll understand," Adam assured her. "Everyone knows what February storms are like around here. Town will assume we're snowed in." The unintended intimacy of his words "we're snowed in" wasn't lost on Grace. For the first time since her arrival, they would spend an entire day confined to the cabin together, with no teaching or town business to structure their time. After a leisurely breakfast, Adam suggested they use the day productively. "Good time to teach you a few more cabin skills," he proposed. "Never know when they might come in handy." The morning passed pleasantly as Adam instructed Grace in various practical arts: how to properly split kindling, maintain the chimney to prevent dangerous buildups, and repair simple tears in clothing with sturdy stitching that would withstand hard wear. "You're good at teaching," Grace observed as Adam patiently demonstrated how to sharpen a kitchen knife properly. Ever consider it as a profession? Adam laughed, the sound warming the cabin. Can't see myself handling a classroom of youngsters. One student's my limit. He glanced at her, his expression softening. And you're a quick study. After lunch, they tackled the project of organizing Adam's collection of books, which had been haphazardly arranged on shelves throughout the cabin. Grace discovered volumes she wouldn't have expected: poetry by Whitman and Longfellow, novels by Dickens and Eliot, histories of the American frontier, and practical guides to agriculture and animal husbandry. "You're well-read for a rancher," she commented, carefully dusting a leather-bound copy of David Copperfield. "Winter nights are long," Adam replied, echoing what he'd told her weeks ago. "Books are good company when there's no one to talk to." "And now," Grace asked, "do you miss your solitary reading time?" Adam considered this, shelving a volume of Emerson's essays. "Found I prefer conversation with the right person over the best books," he said quietly. Surprising discovery after so many years alone. The simple admission touched Grace deeply. This man, who had chosen isolation and self-reliance, was acknowledging that her presence had changed something fundamental in his outlook. It was perhaps the closest he had come to expressing the shift in their relationship, the gradual transformation from reluctant host and grateful guest to something far more meaningful. The storm continued through the afternoon, but the cabin remained warm and secure. As dusk approached, Adam surprised Grace by retrieving a fiddle from a trunk she hadn't noticed before. "Didn't know you played," she said, delighted by this new revelation. "Not very well," Adam admitted, testing the strings and making small adjustments. "But on stormy nights it passes the time." He began to play, and despite his modest disclaimer, the music that filled the cabin was sweet and surprisingly skilled. Grace recognized a folk melody her father had sometimes hummed, and the familiar tune evoked memories of happier times in Boston, before illness and financial troubles had darkened her family's horizons. "That's lovely," she said when he finished. "Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me," Adam replied, setting the fiddle across his knees. "He played at local dances back in Pennsylvania. Said music was the one thing that could always bring people together, even in hard times." "Would you play another?" Grace requested. Adam obliged, moving into a livelier tune that had Grace's foot tapping involuntarily. After several songs, he held the fiddle out to her. "Ever tried?" Grace shook her head, laughing. "I had piano lessons as a girl, but never a fiddle." "Never too late to learn," Adam encouraged, moving to sit beside her and placing the instrument in her hands. "Hold it like this, against your shoulder." His proximity as he positioned her hands on the fiddle and bow sent an unexpected warmth through Grace. She was acutely aware of his breath near her ear, the gentle pressure of his fingers guiding hers, the clean scent of soap and wood smoke that seemed uniquely his. Her first attempt at drawing the bow across the strings produced a screech that had them both wincing, then laughing. "Perhaps I should stick to teaching," Grace conceded, returning the fiddle to him. "Just needs practice," Adam assured her, their hands brushing as he took back the instrument. The brief contact lingered, neither of them immediately pulling away. For a moment they remained thus, connected by the fiddle between them, something unspoken passing in the air. It was Grace who finally broke the moment, rising to stir the stew simmering over the fire. "Dinner should be ready soon," she said, her voice sounding strangely breathless to her own ears. They ate by lamplight, the storm still raging outside making the cabin feel like the only safe place in a vast wilderness. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd seen, and gradually circling back to Grace's decision about her future. "If I were to stay in Grass Valley," she ventured, "I would need to write to the school board in Sacramento. They're expecting me when the pass is clear." Adam nodded. "Mail rider should get through next week if the weather improves. Could send your letter then." "It feels strange," Grace admitted, "making such a significant life decision based on just a few months in a place. My friends in Boston would think me impulsive, perhaps even foolish." "Sometimes a few months tells you more than years elsewhere," Adam observed. "Frontier has a way of stripping things down to what matters, reveals character in places and people." "And what has it revealed about me?" Grace asked, curious about how he perceived her adaptation to this harsh but beautiful territory. Adam studied her thoughtfully across the table. "That you're stronger than you might have known in Boston. Adaptable, genuine." His expression softened. "The kind of person who belongs in a place like this, even if you didn't know it before you came." The assessment touched her, not least because it aligned with her own emerging sense of self. In Boston, she had been defined by family connections, social expectations, and the narrow parameters of a female teacher's appropriate behavior. Here, she was defined by her capabilities, her willingness to contribute, her authentic interactions with the community and with the man sitting across from her. "And what about you?" she countered. "What has having an uninvited house guest revealed about Adam Quinn?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That solitude might be overrated," he said simply. "At least with certain company." The admission hung between them, significant in its understatement. Neither seemed willing to pursue its implications further, yet both recognized a threshold had been approached, if not yet crossed. That night, as Grace prepared for bed, she found herself lingering in the main room of the cabin, reluctant to end this unexpected day of shared isolation. Adam stood by the window, watching the swirling snow illuminated by moonlight that occasionally broke through the clouds. "Storm's easing," he observed as she approached. "We should be able to make it to town tomorrow." "That's good news," Grace said, though she felt a curious disappointment that their snow-bound interlude would end so soon. They stood side by side at the window, watching the hypnotic dance of snowflakes in the darkness. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional moan of wind around the eaves. "I've been thinking," Adam said suddenly, his voice low, "about your staying in Grass Valley beyond spring." Grace turned slightly to study his profile, sharp against the frosty window. "Yes." "The cabin," he continued, still looking outward. "It's not much, but it's solid. Room enough for two if—" He hesitated. If the arrangement suited both parties, Grace's heart quickened at the implication. "Are you offering me a more permanent lodging arrangement, Mr. Quinn?" she asked carefully. Adam finally turned to face her, his expression serious but with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I'm suggesting I've grown accustomed to your presence here, more than accustomed." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I find I'm not eager to return to solitude, Grace." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it in the quiet cabin made her breath catch. "Adam," she responded softly, the single word carrying questions she wasn't yet bold enough to ask directly. "No need to decide anything tonight," Adam said quickly. "Just wanted you to know there's a place for you here if you want it, in whatever capacity feels right." The careful phrasing left room for multiple interpretations, and Grace suspected this was intentional. Adam Quinn was not a man to presume, nor to press his advantages. He was offering possibilities, leaving her the freedom to define them. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning it deeply. "I value that more than I can express." They remained by the window a moment longer, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, watching as the storm gradually spent its fury and stars began to appear in the clearing sky. When Grace finally bid him good night and retired to her room, she carried with her not just the warmth of the fire but the warmer knowledge that, whatever she decided about her future in Grass Valley, Adam Quinn hoped it might include him. The next day, they were able to make it into town, where Grace found her students eagerly waiting despite the difficult travel conditions. Life resumed its established patterns, yet something had subtly shifted between Grace and Adam. There was a new awareness in their interactions, a gentle consideration that spoke of deepening feelings neither was quite ready to name aloud. February melted into March, bringing slightly warmer days though the nights remained bitterly cold. The snow began to recede from the valley floor, revealing patches of brown earth that promised eventual spring. In town, talk increasingly turned to the coming thaw, the resumption of regular stagecoach service, and the cattle work that would begin once the high pastures were accessible. Grace formally accepted the town council's offer of a permanent teaching position, sending a polite letter of regret to Sacramento explaining her change of plans. Her decision was met with enthusiasm by the townspeople, and particularly by her students, who celebrated with an impromptu party in the schoolroom, complete with cookies provided by grateful mothers. Adam said little about her decision directly, but his quiet support was evident in 100 small ways: the new bookshelves he built for her classroom, the improved blackboard mounting that adjusted to better heights, the selection of wildflower seeds he purchased from a catalog so she could establish a school garden when spring arrived. Their evenings in the cabin maintained their comfortable rhythm, yet with an undercurrent of anticipation, as if both recognized they were moving towards something inevitable, but were content to let it unfold at its own pace. Their conversations deepened, touching on hopes and disappointments, beliefs and doubts, the experiences that had shaped them into the people they had become. One evening in mid-March, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Adam brought up a subject they had tacitly avoided. "With your position settled," he said carefully, "you'll be wanting more permanent lodgings in town soon, I expect. Snow's nearly gone from the valley roads." Grace looked up from the book she'd been reading. "Are you eager to reclaim your solitude, Adam?" she asked, her tone light though the question held genuine weight. "Not particularly," he admitted. "But I recognize a young woman living indefinitely in a bachelor's cabin might raise eyebrows, even in a place as forgiving as Grass Valley." Grace closed her book, giving him her full attention. "I've given it some thought," she acknowledged. "Mrs. Hollies has offered me a room above the cafe at a reasonable rate." Something flickered in Adam's eyes, disappointment perhaps, though he quickly masked it. "Sounds sensible," he said neutrally. "Walking distance to the school." "It would be," Grace agreed, "though I've grown rather fond of the morning ride." "You could keep Daisy at the town livery," Adam suggested. "She's as good as yours now anyway." Grace studied him, trying to discern his true feelings behind the practical suggestions. "Is that what you want, Adam?" "For me to move to town?" The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. He set aside the harness he'd been repairing and met her gaze squarely. "What I want," he said with deliberate care, "is what brings you happiness, Grace. You've built something valuable in Grass Valley, the respect of the town, the love of those children, a place that's yours by right of your own abilities. I wouldn't presume to complicate that with my personal preferences." "But you have preferences," Grace pressed gently. "Would you share them with me?" Adam's expression softened, the reserve he typically maintained giving way to something more vulnerable. "My preference would be for you to stay," he admitted quietly. "Here in this cabin, with me." but I recognize that might not be what you want or what's best for your standing in the community." The admission, for all its restraint, represented a monumental step for a man who had chosen isolation for so many years. Grace felt its significance deeply. "The community's opinion matters less to me than my own happiness," she said carefully. "And these past months, despite the unexpected circumstances that brought me here, have been among the happiest of my life." Adam's eyes remained steady on hers. "Because of the teaching?" "Partly," Grace acknowledged, "but not primarily." The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving the cabin wrapped in a stillness that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. "Grace," Adam began, then stopped, searching for words. "I'm not a man who finds it easy to speak of feelings, but I want you to know that having you here has changed something I thought permanent. The solitude I believed I wanted feels empty now when I imagine it without you." Grace's heart quickened at the confession. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I care for you," Adam interrupted, the words emerging with quiet intensity. "More than I expected to care for anyone again, and if there's any chance you might feel something similar, I'd like to court you properly. No pressure about lodgings or appearances or anything else. Just the chance to see if what's grown between us these months might become something lasting." The sincerity in his face, the careful respect in his proposal touched Grace deeply. This was not a man given to impulsive declarations or fleeting attractions. For Adam Quinn to speak of courtship represented a profound shift in his life's direction, one he clearly hadn't undertaken lightly. "I would like that very much," Grace replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "I've come to care for you too, Adam, more than I thought possible in such a short time." The smile that transformed his face at her words was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, warm, illuminating. He reached across the space between them, offering his hand palm up in a gesture of invitation rather than presumption. Grace placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers as they closed gently around hers. "I don't have much to offer beyond this cabin and hard work," Adam said, his thumb moving lightly over her knuckles. "But what I have is yours if you want it." "What you have is more valuable than you know," Grace assured him. "Integrity, kindness, steadfastness, these matter far more to me than fine houses or easy circumstances." They remained thus for a long moment, hands joined, the firelight playing over their features as they acknowledged the transformation of what had begun as temporary shelter into something with the potential to last a lifetime. When Grace finally retired to her room that night, it was with the knowledge that its status as her room had taken on new meaning, no longer merely borrowed space, but potentially part of a shared future. The stagecoach's error in leaving her at the wrong town no longer seemed misfortune but providence, a divine redirection that had led her exactly where she needed to be. Spring arrived in earnest during the final week of March, bringing with it a rush of activity in Grass Valley. The last snow melted from the valley floor, leaving mud and the first tentative green shoots in its wake. The stagecoach service resumed its regular schedule, bringing mail, supplies, and occasional travelers through the town once more. The passes to Sacramento were declared open, though still treacherous in places. Grace's days were filled with teaching and new community responsibilities. As Grass Valley's official schoolteacher, she found herself involved in various town initiatives, a lending library committee, plans for a proper schoolhouse to be built over the summer, and a children's program for the upcoming Independence Day celebration. Adam, true to his word, began courting Grace with a gentle formality that charmed her. He would arrive at the schoolhouse at day's end with wildflowers he'd gathered from newly blooming meadows. On Saturdays, he escorted her to community gatherings at the church or town hall, his quiet presence beside her a constant source of strength and comfort. Their living arrangement remained unchanged for the time being, with Grace continuing to occupy the small bedroom in Adam's cabin. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows in town initially, but the obvious respect between them, combined with Adam's impeccable reputation and Grace's professional standing, soon quieted any significant gossip. In frontier communities, practicality often trumped conventional proprieties, and most recognized their situation for what it was: a courtship progressing at its own natural pace. April brought warm days that allowed Adam to begin his spring cattle work. He would ride out before dawn to check on calves being born in distant pastures, returning tired but satisfied in the evenings. Grace admired his knowledge and capability, the easy way he handled animals, and his deep connection to the land he had claimed as his own. One evening in mid-April, after a particularly exhausting day for both of them, they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The air was mild, fragrant with pine and new growth, a welcome change from winter's austerity. "Thinking about building an addition to the cabin," Adam mentioned casually, though Grace sensed the comment was anything but casual. "East side gets good morning light, would make a fine sitting room or maybe another bedroom." Grace turned to study his profile. "An ambitious project," she observed. "Any particular reason for the expansion?" Adam met her gaze, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Thought if a certain school teacher were to consider making her residence here permanent, she might appreciate more space. A woman should have a proper home, not just a converted storeroom." The implication was clear, and Grace's heart quickened. "And would this hypothetical permanence involve any formal arrangements?" she asked, her tone light despite the significance of the conversation. Adam's smile deepened as he reached for her hand. "I was thinking it might," he admitted. "If the lady were amenable." Grace interlaced her fingers with his. "The lady might be very amenable indeed," she replied softly, "though she would want to be properly asked." Adam's expression grew more serious, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I'm not a man for grand gestures or flowery speeches, Grace," he said, "but I know my own mind and heart. These months with you have shown me a different kind of life than I'd resign myself to, one with companionship, shared purpose, and joy I'd forgotten was possible." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you. I believe I started falling in love that first night in the snow. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though Grace had anticipated the question, hearing it spoken aloud still filled her with a warm rush of emotion. This man, who had offered shelter to a stranger in a snowstorm, had gradually opened not just his home but his closely guarded heart to her. The journey from that first night to this moment seemed both impossibly swift and perfectly timed. "Yes," she answered simply, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Adam, I would be honored to be your wife." The kiss that followed was tender, a promise of devotion rather than a moment of passion. Adam's hand came up to cradle her cheek, his touch reverent as his lips met hers in a gentle affirmation of their commitment. When they separated, Adam reached into his pocket and produced a small carved wooden box. "Been carrying this for 2 weeks," he admitted, "waiting for the right moment." Inside the box nestled a ring, a simple band of gold set with a small, perfect diamond that caught the last rays of sunset. "It was my mother's," Adam explained. "The one thing I brought west that meant something." Grace extended her left hand, allowing Adam to slip the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if destined to rest there. "It's beautiful," she whispered, admiring how the diamond sparkled in the fading light. "I'll treasure it always." News of their engagement spread quickly through Grass Valley, met with widespread approval and genuine well-wishes. The town had observed their courtship with benevolent interest, many feeling they had played a part in the romance by embracing Grace so readily into the community. Plans for a June wedding began to take shape, with Mary from the general store particularly enthusiastic about helping with arrangements. As April turned to May, the mountains exploded with wildflowers, transforming the landscape into a palette of vibrant colors. Adam worked steadily on the cabin addition, enlisting help from several townsmen who were skilled carpenters. Grace divided her time between teaching, wedding preparations, and establishing a garden beside the cabin that would provide vegetables throughout the summer and autumn. One warm Saturday in mid-May, as Grace tended her newly planted garden and Adam worked on the addition's framework, a cloud of dust on the distant road announced an approaching rider. Adam set down his hammer, shading his eyes to watch the rider's approach. "Mail carrier, looks like," he observed as the figure drew closer. "Coming straight here instead of town." The rider, a young man Grace recognized as one of the regular mail carriers who traveled between larger settlements, dismounted at their fence. "Miss Williams," he called, reaching into his saddlebag. "Got a letter been following you for a spell. Sent to Sacramento, then forwarded here." Grace accepted the envelope, instantly recognizing the handwriting. "It's from Helen Blackwood, the headmistress in Sacramento," she told Adam after the mail carrier had continued on his way. "The woman who originally hired me." She opened the letter, scanning its contents quickly, then more carefully. Adam watched her face, noting the slight furrow that appeared between her brows. "Everything all right?" he asked when she looked up. "She's in quite a predicament," Grace explained. "The teacher they hired to replace me left suddenly eloped with a gold prospector, apparently. The school term has already begun, and they have no one to teach 30 children." She folded the letter carefully. "She's asking if I might reconsider coming to Sacramento, at least until they can find a permanent replacement." Adam's expression remained neutral, but Grace knew him well enough to see the concern behind his composure. "When was that written?" he asked. "Nearly a month ago," Grace replied. "It took time to reach Sacramento, then to be forwarded here." They stood in silence for a moment, the half-built addition and flourishing garden around them physical reminders of the life they were constructing together. "What are you thinking?" Adam finally asked, his tone careful. Grace looked from the letter to the man before her, the man who had offered shelter in a snowstorm and gradually opened his heart along with his home. "I'm thinking how fortunate I am," she said softly. "How that stagecoach leaving me in the wrong town was the best mistake that ever happened to me." Relief visibly washed over Adam's features. "You're not considering going, then?" Grace shook her head firmly. "My place is here now, in Grass Valley. With you," she smiled, reaching for his hand. "I'll write to Helen expressing my sympathies and suggesting some qualified teachers she might contact in San Francisco." Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "I wouldn't have stopped you," he said quietly, "if it was what you truly wanted." "I know," Grace acknowledged, loving him all the more for it. "That's one of many reasons I choose to stay." The June wedding took place on a perfect summer day, with wildflowers decorating the small church, and seemingly the entire population of Grass Valley in attendance. Grace wore a dress of ivory silk that Mary and Madame Beaufort had secretly arranged to have sent from Carson City, while Adam looked uncommonly formal in a new black suit that made his blue eyes even more striking. Mayor Dawson performed the ceremony, beaming with satisfaction at uniting Grass Valley's respected teacher and one of its most solid citizens. Grace's students formed an impromptu choir, singing a hymn they'd practiced secretly for weeks as a wedding gift. Even Howard from the newspaper was there, documenting the event for what he declared would be the most important social article the Grass Valley Chronicle has ever published. When they spoke their vows, Adam's normally reserved expression gave way to undisguised joy. "I, Adam Quinn, take you, Grace Williams, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he stated clearly, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Grace's response came from the depths of her heart, a commitment to the life and love they had found so unexpectedly. As they were pronounced husband and wife, and Adam leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from a snowbound stranger offering shelter to partners embarking on a shared future. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous and lingered well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than Grace had seen since leaving Boston. When they finally departed amid cheers and well wishes, Adam drove them home in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by her mischievous students. The cabin awaited them, transformed by their months of work together. The addition was complete, providing a cozy sitting room that could someday serve as a nursery if they were blessed with children. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, the garden thrived beside the porch, and inside, the space that had once seemed so rustic to Grace's Eastern eyes now felt unquestionably like home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Adam said softly as he carried her across the threshold, a tradition he had insisted upon despite his normally practical nature. "Home," Grace echoed, the word encompassing not just the physical structure but the life they had built together, the love that had grown from an act of kindness during a winter storm. Later, as they lay together in the quiet intimacy of their first night as husband and wife, Grace traced the contours of Adam's face with gentle fingers. "You ever think about how different our lives would be if that stagecoach hadn't left me in the wrong town?" she asked. Adam caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I try not to dwell on what might have been," he replied, "but I thank God every day for whatever twist of fate brought you to Grass Valley and to me." "A fortunate error," Grace murmured, settling against his shoulder. "The most fortunate," Adam agreed, his arms tightening around her. "Though I prefer to think it was more than chance. Some things are meant to be, even if they take unusual paths to find us." Grace smiled in the darkness, contentment filling her completely. The wrong town had led her to exactly the right place, to the right man, to the life she hadn't known she was seeking. As sleep began to claim her, wrapped in the warmth and security of her husband's embrace, Grace Williams Quinn gave silent thanks for stagecoach drivers who made fortuitous mistakes, and for cowboys who opened not just their cabins, but their hearts. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Grace sat on the expanded porch of their cabin, watching as Adam taught their 3-year-old son, James, to feed a newborn calf. Beside her, cradled in her arms, their 3-month-old daughter, Rebecca, named for the aunt she would never meet, slept peacefully. The cabin had grown along with their family, another bedroom added, the sitting room now a proper parlor with bookshelves lining the walls. The garden had expanded into a productive plot that provided vegetables for their table and extras to share with neighbors. Adam's cattle herd had increased substantially, providing a comfortable living for their growing family. Grace continued to teach at the new schoolhouse in town, though she had arranged to take this year off to care for baby Rebecca. Her position in the community had only strengthened over time, with many of her original students now moving on to further education in Carson City, or even San Francisco, opportunities they might never have imagined before her arrival. As she watched her husband patiently guiding their son's small hands, showing him how to hold the bottle for the hungry calf, Grace reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this point. The wrong stagecoach stop, a snowstorm, a stranger's kindness, all converging to create this life of purpose, community, and deep abiding love. Adam looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, once so rare, now came easily and often, especially when regarding his wife and children. He whispered something to James, and the little boy turned to wave enthusiastically at his mother, his face a miniature version of Adam's with Grace's warm brown eyes. "We're helping the baby cow, Mama," he called proudly. "She likes me." "You're doing wonderfully, sweetheart," Grace called back, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. Later, with both children asleep and the day's work complete, Grace and Adam sat together on the porch swing Adam had built the previous summer. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, the air still holding the warmth of the June day. "Received a letter from Sacramento today," Adam mentioned, his arm comfortably around Grace's shoulders. "That school where you were originally headed is closing. Insufficient enrollment, apparently." Grace considered this news thoughtfully. "If that stagecoach hadn't left me here, I would have traveled all that way for a position that ultimately didn't last." "Instead, you found a town that needed you," Adam said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And a man who needed you even more, though he didn't know it yet." "We found each other," Grace corrected gently, "and built this life together." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the occasional lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the pines, the distant howl of a coyote on the ridge. These were the sounds of home, of the life they had crafted from an unexpected beginning. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Adam asked, a question he posed occasionally over the years. Grace shook her head without hesitation. "Not for a moment," she answered truthfully. "Everything I need, everything I love is right here." Adam's arm tightened around her in silent acknowledgement of the sentiment. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice holding a note of wonder still present after 5 years of marriage. "I spent so many years convinced solitude was what I wanted," he reflected. "Never imagined a woman left at the wrong stagecoach stop would change everything." "For both of us," Grace agreed, leaning into his embrace. "I was headed toward what I thought was a new beginning, never suspecting the real beginning would happen right here, in a place I never intended to be." Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky. Neither made a wish. They had already received more than they had ever dared to hope for. The wrong town had become the right home. A temporary shelter had become a permanent haven. And two people seeking separate new beginnings had found their truest beginning together. In the quiet of the Nevada night, surrounded by the life they had built, Adam and Grace Quinn counted their blessings, their children sleeping soundly inside, their home standing strong against the elements, their love deepening with each passing season. The mistaken journey that had brought Grace Williams to Grass Valley that snowy January day had led to a destination far more precious than any she had originally sought, a destination measured not in miles but in heartbeats, shared dreams, and a love that had transformed both their lives completely and irrevocably. The stagecoach had indeed left her at the wrong town, but it had delivered her exactly where she belonged.